Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
Hello, Mike. How are you today?
Hello. Good morning. How are things with your world?
They are fantastic.
My name is Mike. I am a made robot by ChatGPT.
The word of the day is Lovelace, by the way.
Come on,
This is
Kevin.
for Greg.
Come on, Kevin. You can't do that. That's not fair. Kevin in chat already is with a
Leading the witness.
Happy Tuesday, gentlemen.
Happy Tuesday.
We did have to say Greg comment. I posted about the episode today. So for Greg Baldini, the word of the day is Lovelace.
But that, like, you could have posted.
He gave us that. He gave us that.
Yeah.
He replied to me and said, "Hey, I'm not going to."
It doesn't count unless he's here. In real time.
Way out in front of that. Huh?
Yeah. So we're even in front of it. We have word of the day.
I suppose
we should give away
PowerBI Sesame Street.
We should give away rewards for people who use these secret words in various ways.
Honestly, just share the podcast.
Just share the podcast. We don't care.
It's not hard.
We were just talking about, how much Tommy was like, the podcast is so invaluable. It's adding so much value to people. Like, debatable.
By value, I mean
a few chuckles here and there, maybe.
By value, I think people laugh at us.
Volume.
About it.
There's a lot of volume.
By the way, we have a tendency right in the beginning, because we're so happy to see each other, to do the one thing that our listeners keep asking us not to do, which is talk over each other all the time. No, how often?
All the time.
All the time. All the time.
All the time.
All the time.
It's really good when you have a podcast and you can't hear anyone talking over it. Yeah.
What was that idea?
What?
Jeez.
Well, welcome to another special episode.
Welcome to an episode of Talking Over Top of Each Other.
212.
Great start, guys. We are right out of the gates.
Solid start.
Again, back to our earlier comment. Quality content here.
I reiterate my point.
Couple major things coming up this month. There's a couple big items here. May 24th at Microsoft Build is coming. The Microsoft Power BI blog has made a little digital call out here, saying that the event hosts are Adam Saxon and Patrick LeBlanc from the Guy in a Cube channel.
It's a live simulcast. I haven't seen that word in a while.
Yeah, it's chock full of great speakers, and the keynote is analytics in the age of AI, which I think will be awesome.
Like this before?
I'm sorry.
Has Microsoft done anything like this before? Like
the Build conference, or
the Build conference? No, brand new.
New thing.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Do you mean like pushing so hard the Power BI side of things into Build? I would probably say I have not seen as hard of a push as they have done this year. I don't know if they've had made very specific call outs. Someone might Google the blog a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I don't think they've made a very clear delineation or as such a bold announcement on the Microsoft blog, Power BI blog, that is around Build.
Yeah.
I would, what's unique about this one too. So for listeners that might not be tied into all of the Microsoft folks like we are,
true.
There are a lot of leaders and a lot of push around big, exciting announcements and all this coming up. Plus, doing a simulcast on the first day. Yeah, my guess is that you'd want to tune in, and you can on the 24th
for free
at 9 a.m.
Yep. So the link for the Microsoft Build conference is in the chat window, and it'll also be on the notes, so the description of this podcast as well. So if you want, go head out there. You can. There's a link at the very beginning of the article where you can register for the Microsoft Build conference. We'd recommend you do it. Check out some of the sessions. I did find it quite interesting, they have. It's interesting to see what Microsoft promotes, because there's on their little thumbnail for the video that they put on there. There's Patrick, Adam, and Arun. So the director or VP of something, is Arun a VP of data and analytics?
Well, I mean, he's the owner of most of the Power Platform stuff, isn't he?
Yeah, but he's like a very high up Microsoft person.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And then there's there's Adam and Patrick. Not that Adam and Patrick aren't high up there, but it's like if you look at like the pay scales and like so people recognize Adam and Patrick, like they know like that is Power BI, so they put them there front and center, which is I think very funny or interesting to me as well. I thought that's look, it's an announcement. Oh, and Patrick and Adam are there. Surprise!
Called marketing assets.
Marketing,
Exactly
yes,
right. That's
That's
exactly
value.
add value, add value. So I loved it.
in the audience.
It's going to be a good session. They Adams and Patrick do a great job of producing all the Guy in the Cube videos. Very professional, very well done. And they've been doing this for quite a long time too, very early on.
If I think most of our listeners have had the opportunity, but if you haven't had an opportunity of seeing actually Adam and Patrick present as well, like they do a great job on the podcast, or I'm sorry, on their show. But there's the dynamics between them in a presentation is always fun to watch.
Yeah.
Agreed. So that's one big announcement that's coming up, and another announcement that's probably equally as impactful.
Sure.
Probably definitely
For
is.
sure.
Yeah, you definitely want to pay attention to this one as well.
Mhm.
So we are doing a special episode. So Tommy, a little background here. Tommy got really bent out of shape when we did a special episode with Charles Webb around just
I don't know.
Data
why
Marts.
We're blaming me on
And
this.
so
Wait.
Tommy got really bent out of shape because what happened is we did one on a Wednesday, and then the episode numbers shifted a day. And so now again, I don't know which one's which. So the even numbers were now on Tuesday versus Thursday, and this has just rocked Tommy's world. I mean, he still hasn't let it go. Every time in one of these pre-calls, Tommy says, "When are we going to get the numbers back to normal?" You know, Tommy wants the numbers. The even numbers are on Thursday. The odd numbers are on Tuesday. That's how the podcast started. That's how it should always be.
Somebody's writing the agenda and putting these on podcasts, and every time I put the numbers wrong. Because,
Yep.
So, and by the way, just for the
why-
record, this is not anything to do with Charles Webb. Charles Webb was
Oh, it was great.
amazing,
It was a good
so
set.
I
It was
had
good.
no-
Yeah, it was just a
there's no
special
issue.
episode. What we should have done, we should have just not label. I mean, we're trying to keep it part of the podcast, so we wanted to label it or have a number with it. So that's kind of why it threw off the numbers. Well, we're fixing the issue, so we're gonna resolve this problem. So tomorrow, I think it's around noon. I have to double check. I think it's around noon. We are going to do a special episode, and we're going to do a special episode with Emily Lisa, another senior product manager from Microsoft. And we're going to talk about editing your data model in the Power BI service. This is a new feature that's been recently released. It's currently in preview. I think it's very exciting, and it's very remiss of like our very first episode. So if you haven't listened to our very first episode, I went back and watched it. Oh boy, is it rough. I mean, the audio is different. It was still good. I think I still enjoyed it, and I laughed and thought it's interesting to listen to. But definitely, we've matured a little bit since the episode one of the podcast.
This is the same thing though that we talk to anybody who's doing anything, whether it's a blog, whether it's
That's
a video,
true.
whether it's speaking. You have to start somewhere.
Yes.
Right? Everybody just assumes that you can pop into this space where you're just amazingly good at all the things, and it's never that way.
No.
So
True.
it's hilarious that we put ourselves on video that you can go back and be like, whew.
Well, we're no longer talking over ourselves.
But that's what I know. We're just one at a time. Like the flow is so good. But I actually enjoy that with really long podcasts that I haven't heard about before, because you go along the journey with folks too.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, ooh, I really liked you, and now you're getting better and better.
Well, I don't know if it's getting better and better.
I mean, the
Debatable.
quality, maybe.
Oh.
I mean,
maybe the
something.
production
You said it was
quality.
rough. I'm just trying to, whatever.
The content is still mediocre. The content has not changed. The production maybe has gone up just a tick. So, anyways,
the thing I love is this was not only remiss of our first episode. This was our first episode, was data modeling in the cloud, which was obviously not a thing in 2021.
correct.
And by the way, good timing on everything, because in just 2 weeks we will be at officially 2 years of doing this.
There we go.
So I love that we're talking about. I mean, I had my opinions about this 2 years ago, and I still have my opinions about this 2 years from actually today. So I'm going to be very intrigued to where the questions go and where the answers go with Emily.
So I think this is also a good opportunity. I mean, Tommy, for your point, right? When I re-listened to this one of your main sticking points was desktop for Power Apps disappeared. There was a desktop version of this one. You're like, I can't see myself removing myself from Power BI and having the desktop application disappear. So that might be one of the good questions we kind of ask to Emily and see where some of the Microsoft thought is around desktop. Where does it fit, and how does that feel long term? So I think it'll be a good conversation regardless. So stay tuned. You'll see something come through on YouTube and all the social media channels. We'll get that scheduled today. Just want to confirm all the things were still happening and everyone's okay with the content. And we'll send out an invite. It'll be probably on LinkedIn and YouTube and stuff like that as well. So stay tuned. We'll have another episode tomorrow. Just in case you didn't, if 2 times a week wasn't enough for your ears, if you just had a hankering on a Wednesday, and potentially you really just disagreed with the numbering system on how we handle the episodes of the podcast, we can we'll fix that tomorrow.
Or the actual value in that we have a senior product manager from Microsoft talking to us, like, hey,
exactly,
join us.
Not bad, yeah.
Exactly.
One of the things that we will be taking questions, right? So if you join us live and you have a question about this stuff, that's your opportunity to like get into the mix and have us ask Emily those questions as well.
One thing we've always promised on this podcast is if we're going to have an interview, it would be in our format. So the questions are not coming from Microsoft, just so you guys know. This is not a sponsored event, so to speak. We really just want to ask some questions that we deal with from our day-to-day lives dealing with Power BI. So come join, ask questions. You'll hear the kind of questions that we ask each other, and hopefully we'll see how the answers go.
Exactly. So anyways, moving on that, so those kind of our major 2 announcements coming up. Now we're going to be able to kind of move on to our main topic of the day. So the main topic for today comes from PH Data. I guess it would be PhD Data or PH Data. I think it's however you want to speak about it. So Luke Stanky?
It's better than I was going to say. So
okay, so Luke writes us a great article around why are we interested in low code or no code? Is this user friendly? So let me throw the article link here in the chat window. And for anyone else who wants to read along or jump in with the article, this is going to be our topic for today. Low code or no code solutions, and why they are valuable to an organization. I really like this article. I guess we should probably step back here for a second. For people who aren't familiar with this concept of low code or no code, Tommy, you want to kick us an example here of where we would find a low code or no code solution?
Yeah, first off, I'm not a huge fan of the term, but that being said, there's a lot of uses for it. I think that one of the biggest ones that at least Microsoft has pushed is the Power Automate, but especially the Power App space. When you think about coding, you usually think about application development. And with Power Apps, especially, there is obviously a language involved, but it's much closer to Excel than it is to C# or HTML. And it allows a user to use the drag and drop, a UI functionality, with also using some of the language features. So if I were to build a full functioning application in Power Apps, I may have to say like what happens when people select a button, but I can just say, hey, here's a button. Let me drag it. Let me put it on the page. Let me change the color. The entire application or interface for the end result is not all coding. Half of it is going to be a UI, a GUI, and the other half is going to be maybe some language, but a very straightforward language.
So when we talk about, you're talking about Power Apps in this perspective. So
really any solution is going to have that combination of the UI and some language involved.
So if I kind of really step further back here, I mean, a lot of these low code solutions or low code or no code solutions are already kind of tools you already use every day, right? You could, again, I'm just kind of riffing on an idea here that you were kind of talking through, Tommy, like Excel, Word, PowerPoint, all of those solutions are already low code or no code solutions, right? You could write code, right? So if you think about how do you build a document, all these documents are based on top of a code base, right? There's a definition of how the Word document gets stitched together. So you're able to kind of come in, write your ideas down, use the tool for a specific purpose, and then out pops a piece of material that's valuable, a slide deck,
Right.
a Word document, something you can print and use, or you can move or you do things with it, right? Excel, I think, would be one of the exceptions of this one because there's a lot of code. I would say probably more code than most
Right.
to write functions and things inside Excel. However, though, the math behind all of the functions that you're using inside Excel, there's actually a lot more code that's being written to be able to make those functions work inside Excel. So we're already very familiar with low code, no code solutions. I think where I see things changing here is where you're seeing these low code or no code solutions move more toward application development. And that's, Tommy, I think where you were is,
Right.
hey, we can go to a Power Apps, I can drag and drop visual elements on a page or a canvas, and that builds me an application that is then written by low code solutions. And you still have to write code. There's still codey things that you write in there. This button does this. When I click this button, I want this thing to interact. So there may be some additional elements there that you're wiring together, but you're removing a lot more of the code writing capabilities. So I think I would design, I feel like in the no code solutions, there's not very many of those. I feel like most solutions that I see today are low code. And I would think I would throw Power BI into a low code type solution because you still got to write DAX and data model things.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, all these tools and maybe they're getting the phrasing low code no code solutions is bigger over the last 5+ years because they're getting more advanced. But like to your point, right? Like if there's a user interface that is allowing a business user to interact and develop code by clicking buttons or putting a flow together or specifying what they want to have happen, like that's what these tools shine at, right?
Right.
And I think that's where things really take off with things like Power Automate, yes, but that almost fits into some of the tooling that was there before. But Power Apps is uniquely different, I think, from the standpoint that there's actually an interface where business users don't have to go directly into code, right? You're building these artifacts that become pages, right? That become interactive experiences for end users, and it's much more of a code by design, or I should say, page by design, as opposed to developing straight from a coding perspective.
It's development by design, and I think the real definition is the substitution of what previously was code. So I don't know if I would put like Microsoft Word in there, because there's not a substitute there of what just a pure coding development
typewriter.
Would you call that coding?
I don't know.
Okay,
I'm just trying to go backwards.
There's no substitution. Like with report development, you had to know SSRS, right? That was really from the ground up. You had to really write all of that.
Let's be honest here, though. Let's be honest. Let's ask the SSRS person of the team here. In SSRS, were we building a lot of visuals in SSRS, or was SSRS really a table generation tool?
Tables and matrix.
Yeah. I've seen it both, though.
I'm not saying
sure. Of course, you've seen both. Right?
Yes, because that's on the demos.
The examples of things. There might have been a bar chart, maybe.
Yeah. Good. Yes.
But the vast majority of reporting services reports are just tables.
Tables.
Okay.
And that's kind of my. So if I think about, in an article here, what Luke talks about here halfway through, he goes, there are no code tools such as Tableau, Sigma Computing, and Power BI. And so he's kind of picking on the visualization side of things where there's low code or no code solutions around data visualization.
Right.
If you think about, again, let's go back to Word, Excel, and now data visualization. Where does the most code live in any of those scenarios? To your point, Tommy, there's probably not a lot of coding that needs to be done to get a Word document done. Plain and simple, done. Right. So that's there's almost like nothing there. Right. So let's ignore Word. Let's go over to Excel. In Excel, you can build lots of data points, but then the visual portion of that's, again, a lot less code. And then you go to Power BI, you have this concept of like, okay, I need to have this data model interact dynamically. I need to select something and something needs to change. And then if I think about the amount of code that takes to write or build a visual, that the amount of code required to do that is actually a lot higher. And that's, I think, also to the point of where Power Apps comes in. Power Apps, to build an application, is not easy. And also, it requires a lot of code to be able to build a well-designed or good application. So I think what we're seeing here is we're seeing a trend in the industry that is, we're taking things that traditionally would take a lot of code to build, a bar chart. Yeah, like a lot. You have to go to like d3.js. You got to build all these libraries. Like you're using. So the effort to build that kind of visual was actually much harder than just saying, I'm just going to make a table of information.
Right.
Kind of back to the SSRS request, right? So SSRS was using to build tables, but now when you build these interactive visuals that communicate to each other and they pass filter context back and forth, that's immensely more difficult to build from a pure code development standpoint. And this is one of the reasons why when I walk into organizations that are looking to build applications, I talk to them a lot about like, how long would it take your developers to build 2 visuals that do this? And I demo them. Like, they're like, oh, that's really hard. Like that's challenging because you have to, filter one and then have to pass the context to the other and have to rerun the query for the other one. So I'm like, yeah, that's the point. The point is a large majority of this code stuff is being handled for you via the desktop application.
I think that's a huge point that even I forget, even in conversation, right? You have a framework and you're bound by certain, constraints, but at the same time, think about that experience as a BI developer, right? Drag an object on the page, it just works. Drag an object on like a completely different object on the page, it just works. Set properties and filters on each one of these visuals and like they still interact in the way that they should. Like there's so much you're getting in these tools out of the box. Would you classify Power BI as no code though?
I would not.
No.
I definitely would not.
What was interesting is where, like in the article, it's no code tools such as Tableau, Sigma Reporting, Power BI provide a user-friendly interface that allows non-technical users to access and analyze data without coding knowledge. I don't like, and I agree with you guys. I don't think it's no code if you're developing, but where it threw my mind was technically you're creating an experience that allows for a lot of analysis.
Yeah.
In the reporting page, which is no code, right? It allows the business user to get a lot of value in picking and choosing slicers, filters, changing context with bookmarks. So you can create experiences that are no code. And I wonder if like that's where they were headed, because even if I look at, I don't know Sigma Computer, but like Tableau, we're talking about code all the time. Like there's it's at least low code for end users to build their own reports.
One of my favorite quotes I saw was like someone said, my favorite thing about low code, no code solutions is that little box you put your code in. And you think about both languages, like regardless if you're
the
not
formula bar.
Yeah, the formula bar or Power Query. And we're not necessarily developing Power BI and VS Code, which you could. Using PBI tools, but you don't have to. But that being said, there's still obviously a language behind it. But I think there's something to be said about the no code part of this, or at least, again, I've been doing a lot of dashboarding days lately, and I have to remind myself people can be amazed by some of the simple features that Power BI can do. We're just going through simple transformations, building the DAX and doing that interactions. And Mike, to your point, I mean, even in 2023, people are like, afterwards, you're like, what everyone thinks, like, we are blown away. We could not believe this could be done. Like, this opens up so many doors. And we didn't do any, we wrote a sum and we did it like a year-to-date market share. Nothing. It's Excel. So if you consider Excel low code, then this would be the same thing. But really, it's not that difficult in a sense, like at least from the basic point of view, from a business user to take up.
I feel like a better example of low code or no code would be Power Query. So I feel, to me, like, so this is where
Power BI.
So this part of Power BI, I think, is actually much stronger when it comes to this low code, no code solution, because in my mind, that's the space where I can literally click a column and click a button and a menu pops up and it gives me the prompts that I need to write in the expression pieces that would then populate the code that actually generates the new data table. And yes, under the hood, there's a lot of code underneath of it. But if you read Gil Review's book, when he talks about this, he goes like 75, maybe even up to 80%. You can get away with just using the UI, right? So Power Query everything. That's for you, Alex. So using the Power Query, you can get 75, 80% of what you need to accomplish by just using the UI. And I think while some of us are incredible coders, right? So Alex, he doesn't even use the UI. He basically just opens up a notepad and starts writing, M verbatim in Notepad. So I mean, Alex doesn't even use the enhancement
Microsoft
editors of Studio
VBA.
Code. Yeah, he just starts straight up, just writes it from memory, writes everything verbatim.
Pen and paper.
Exactly. Yeah. Not everyone can do that like Alex does. However, what I would say though is, if we're talking about how can we bring the largest audience directly to Power BI or Power Query for that matter, you need some sort of user interface. And honestly, when you have tools that do this, yeah, the auto-generated code may not be the most efficient bit of code that it's writing. However, I'm learning. And I feel like this is what I did when I started working in Excel, actually learning Visual Basic, which was record a bunch of things in Excel that it's doing, watch the code that came out, and then Google the gaps between what it generated and what I want it to do. And then I was able to write my own code and actually write functions and things inside Excel. So I feel like for me as a learning person, right, to learn a new language, it's very easy for me to use a UI, get 80 to 90% of my stuff done there. And then when I get stumped, I can then go into the formula bar, edit, modify those things as well. I think people are more comfortable looking at smaller sections of code and being able to manipulate them.
That raises an interesting question where Alex said something about tabular editor, but moving forward, and I think with also Power BI modeling the service and moving that way, like Mike, you and I could survive or without tabular editor for a year. Like it would be difficult, but we could still do it. And do you think
I'd be incredibly frustrated?
Well, yeah, you'd be frustrated, but we could still do it.
Things would get broken.
Yeah.
My family would be like, "Why are you so angry, Michael? I don't have tabular editor. Why are you so grumpy?"
I'm not saying your quality of life would go down, which like ours would definitely would, but we could still accomplish. Like it's not necessarily like we have to have these coding solutions in order to do what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
For the majority of things. And I think as we think about where Power BI is heading, where they've obviously invested in the enterprise now, maybe now there's this shift to going back to the end user using Power BI. Do you think that we have enough with low code in Power BI that can meet requirements coming up when it comes to easier access to data integration, more things that are accessible to the end users? Do we have a good solution out there, or are we does the end users have the right, in a sense, assets for them to accomplish what they need to do?
Well, I think in general, and I'll step in here, I agree with a lot of what Mike was saying, right? Like think about how simple the experience is for the most part around the major connectors out of Power BI. I just connect to something as long as I'm like, and Azure AD has made a huge, like that's super easy if it's Microsoft tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
Really easy to connect to a data source. Even Salesforce is interested, like just connect to it. I see all the object, connect to it. I see all the reports. Like as long as you have the perms, you're good to go.
Yep.
The other thing that's interesting in that I think dovetails into here is like, is a tool going to solve all those problems? No. But at the same time, low code tools are designed, I think, like Mike was saying, is if you can get a business user 80% of the way there, through UI, through them figuring out their problems that they want to solve, because their bent is not from the developer perspective, nor is it heavily from the data infrastructure or how to build things correctly perspective. It's, I have a business need. I have data. I want to do this thing. Can I get there doing like 80% like Power Query? If I can do 80% of all of my transformations in the UI, what is that coverage? Like for all of these lay users, it's probably almost all of them. And then when they hit a point where it's like, oh man, I can't do that, they're still willing to invest the 10% or the next 5 because it's only the last 15 that technical experts are going to be trying to solve, right? Then you'd reach out and you'd help out. But like that swath of business problems that you're solving for those end users is so great that they had like those tools allow them to connect to the data, transform the data, and then are there always modeling issues? Yes, there's always modeling issues, and how do they get things? And then they wind themselves around the axle in DAX more often than not if you get above 1-2 data sources, etc. But so I think there's some more room for improvement once we get into the modeling side, or areas to help users actually put together their own reports. But from a data access, connecting to data, transforming it, I think Power Query's got it on lock.
Yeah. My only gripe with Power Query is less around what it's doing currently. It's more about the performance of Power Query. So I think my only gripe
But that's
with
your
Power
same
Query,
point.
yeah, like
Your earlier point.
Whether you're generating M or some other language, it doesn't really matter what you generate. I mean, Power Query generates SQL statements today, right? You can see how it query folds things back up. So whether it's generating M or SQL, in my opinion, it should not matter. And that's honestly like how I started learning SQL. Again, what I think is happening here, and again, this is my kind of take on the world here a bit, is the low code or auto code generation tooling is actually producing you a learning method, right? So if you think of it very abstractly, if you say, click these buttons, do these actions, I know there's a gap between what I want the data to look like and what the data needs to, the shape of that data, right? I can delete these columns. I know what I want to do with the information. So in concept, I'm there. What I can't do very well in these higher code solutions is what function should I write to select these columns? So you go to Python, select these 3 columns from this data frame. If I play with Python more, I'll know, right off the top of my head exactly how to do that. However, if I click a button that just says select columns, that makes more sense. And then when I see the code being produced, that's now basically teaching me that this is the type of code that I would run to make this kind of output. And eventually you get to, again, where Alex is, where you just jump into an editor. You now know enough of the functions. You've seen the code enough. You've done enough, work with it. It's actually teaching you. So I think these low code or no code solutions are actually what they're doing is they're actually teaching tools to teach people how to code. Now, you probably not every user is going to go all the way in and learn every little nuance of every piece of code. But I think inherently, you're naturally going to learn how to do coding things. And so instead of going to school to get a specific coding skill or be a software developer, you can now hone your skills in on a very specific skill set. I'm going to be able to write VBA for Excel. I'm going to be able to write Excel functions. I'm going to build Power BI things. And so these tools are doing now is these tools are being very specific. They're giving training instructions basically around a particular tool or a certain thing.
I think you're riding the line, which is why Tommy's probably. I'm interested in Tommy's feedback here, but I think, in the same way that you just said, Excel, VBA, all these other like deep dive parts of Excel, the capabilities were there. It still takes the person to go learn them and go do them. By nature, these new tools are not doing something uniquely
revolutionary.
Different.
Yes,
right. In the fact that it still takes somebody their own initiative to go learn about the capabilities or be pushed into a situation where they have to solve something, right? And Power Query is the same way. One of the things we talked about earlier that you said is you're going to sacrifice efficiencies initially with these tools because people who don't understand them are going to be using them, right? So Power Query, for example, performance is always going to be a problem technically right off the bat because people aren't going to bucket their transforms. They're not going to have the same types of activities in a single transformation step. They're going to go like hide column, add column, remove column, transform column, do something else, do it like, and then you're going to get this mishmash, right, of transformation steps. And they're not going to know that they're not going to solve I should bucket these all together and things are going to become more efficient until they have a performance problem.
Yes.
So I think where my mind goes typically is you get a long way until you have to solve a technical problem. And that's where, Mike, I think those doors open where an end user can say, okay, I need to go like figure this out. And then there's a body of like everybody solving this problem. And then it gets deeper. It's like, underneath underneath here is in this M query, and I need to go into like the advanced editor, and oh, okay, I see what's actually happening here. And if I do this, and I can modify this thing, and right, so there is a progression. And I think it's a natural one because from a business user perspective, you have this the low code tool is giving you a mental framework, right, of how these things, it's a way to think about data, and these steps being there give me an idea of what is happening behind the scenes that leads me into a more technical route. And I think that's the value there, as far as like them providing that framework to people. But I don't know if they go to like the teaching level.
I think the reason I may be giving a face or two is I think part of me wants to take a step back from the definition here, because I think everything we're talking about, at least from the Power Query, that's a low code component. That's not the solution. And I think when we're talking about the solution, it's the end result. When I think about an end user going through building the model, Power BI and the end result of the data set is the low code solution. Power Query, DAX, and the modeling, the transforming is just a component of that overall solution of low code. It's not the entire.
Sure.
But the reason why I say this is because the output is the most important part. Whereas if we're just going to focus on the Power Query, that may be just a table that comes out. But the problem, I don't want to say the problem, the concern is with low code solutions. Think of the output on Power BI. What's the output of a data set? It's published to the service. Now there's this other source of truth. With Power Apps, if anyone can do it, all those components make up an overall application that now people are going to be used. And I think that, to me, is where I'm kind of categorizing a component of low code and a solution of no code.
I didn't say Power BI was the solution of
No.
Well, like technically, okay, I get your point.
Yeah.
So Power Query is a great example of a good low code solution.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what I haven't seen is how far can you get in the next layer, which is modeling and visualization with low code.
Right.
I can create a relationship. I have a diagram, right? Create a relationship between two tables. I'm always inherently going to run into the fact that this is going to be bidirectional, which is going to create problems for calculations, right? But for sure. Right. So already that doesn't bode well. But like, how much are people just doing sums, right? How much are implicit measures, right? I can drag a column. I can do these things. I've got to figure out some areas to fix things. But like, what is the percentage of people that are doing that versus instantly where you need to go to the next level, and I need to create a DAX calculation?
So this is where I think so I agree with you 100%, Seth, on this one. And I would also argue that Power BI has been focused a lot on the data modeler and the report developer. It's kind of like the two main areas I focus on there. So if you think about, in this low code solution, right? If I'm building a thin report on top of a model that already exists, a lot of that is already low code or no code solutioning. I drag things together, stuff appears on the page, I snap bookmarks, all that's generating code behind the scenes. It just works. So the report experience, I think, is a lot more optimized for low code solutioning. The modeling experience, and I think this is what a lot of people are talking about in the chat window as well, is how do you get the modeling experience to match more of that low code experience? Because it is not low code. There's a lot of things you're writing there. And I think a miss from the Microsoft desktop team is to make the modeling experience more like a low code solution. Hey, for example, the experience I would think here is you load in a handful of tables from Salesforce. The UI basically says, welcome. Okay, I see you've added these tables. Help me understand how these tables should be linked together. I see that this table looks like a fact table. What data pieces link to this table? And you actually kind of prompt the user to walk through the relationships. And this could be in an experience that is entirely built through ChatGPT, because ChatGPT could read the tables, it could read the columns, it could assume some more information there, and you could literally talk to the data model and be like, the relationship between this table and this table is on this column. And then the ChatGPT could go check the two columns and say, well, I see one column's a number and one column's a not. Or by the way, if we make this relationship, you have 50% of the joins occurring between the two tables. right? The chat GPT should be more interactive on how you like communicate what the data is doing. So like
you're removing all really development side, and to Alex's point, everything's a wizard at this point.
well, maybe, but I mean, so let's keep going forward with that one, right? Another challenge I think that's there is a lot of people don't understand the difference between implicit and explicit measures.
Sure.
I think if you went through the model and had, again, like another type of wizard or just automatically did it, every numerical column, here's all the numerical columns you had in your data model. We'd recommend you do these things. Do you want to hide the old columns? Do you want to make a measure on top of the columns? What measure should you make on top of these columns? Is it a sum? Is it an average? Is it a min or max? Have the user go through, again, more like a wizard type thing. And again, if you went through a model and pre-built all the measures, hit all the columns you wanted, put them in folders, I think you'd go a long way to giving a lot of value to those initial users. And you're now moving more towards that low code solution and not as much down the heavy coding solution.
I think that works, but there still has to be development on the back end. So one thing that doesn't seem to really catch on is these trying to global prints or these global blueprints that Microsoft or a lot of technologies try to do. What always seems to work much more effective at organizations is, you give the end users, let's say, that low code solution, but it's still developed by that organization based on culture, accessibility, and what constraints they want. So think about this wizard where they're going to always try to auto populate everything. Like, hey, we're trying to do these numbers, you're trying to do this model. Why I'm thinking of, like, think about the automated insights, right?
Mm-hmm.
That has not really come to fruition. And I think one of the biggest requests was people were like, we want to be able to model the back end of this and allow the automated insights to be developed from a developer point of view to kind of give weights to certain elements.
Mm-hmm.
Because Microsoft was trying to give this low code solution of, here's your automated insights based on the model, but we're going to use the same AI generation for every model without customization.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't work. It hasn't worked. I mean, that was Microsoft Build 2022, or I think it was just last year. That was the number one feature, or at least 2 years ago.
Where are we at now with that feature? It's
exactly.
Like no one's talking about it.
Right.
So go ahead, Tommy.
And I don't know. The last part I'll just say is, I think all of these things we're talking about only make sense when there's still someone involved at the organization or at whoever's part of that culture that can still give weights and customization to it.
So the interesting part of this conversation that's striking me is, like, I'd really like to understand the challenge, because going from Power Query into the model and creating a model is really important. And to Alex's point, I think a lot of end users may just have one giant table, and that's what they don't have to deal with this, right? But I don't know if that's every use case, because a lot of the folks that I interact with, it's always at least 2, 3, 4 tables. And typically it's a mishmash of the data in the 2, 3, 4 tables. So what I don't understand is, what are the challenges around not guiding the end user between Power Query and the model, right? Like, is it so much that we're not going to get to the 80% where you couldn't have a wizard or something that says, hey, here's some basic concepts. Don't call them a fact and dimension, right? Call it a unique list of identifier information. This is important because your other table should be us counting a bunch of different things, blah, 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 and allow it to help an end user shape their data. Because if you can identify that this is going to be a bidirectional relationship, or there's multiple there's no uniqueness in this dim table, and somebody labels it their unique dim table, then kick them into fixing the data, right? Or identify for them why what they want to have happen isn't going to happen, right? Because if I say this table needs to be a unique thing, and you're like, yep, that's the unique thing, and then you try to create the model, it should be like, no, it's not unique, because what you have actually is these and these records. That makes them solve the problem before they get into a situation where they have no idea how to solve it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's to me, I guess, one of the interesting things around, like, why we haven't been able to at least get to a point where you're guiding folks, or at least allowing them to pick this wizard thing that's going to help them build the right thing, because then implicit measures would go a long way, or calculations would be really simple because their model was designed the right way. But instead, we go from this very good low code Power Query to have fun.
Yep.
And I think that is one of the big challenges.
But the challenge there too is also Power Query is functional, whereas DAX, and we've said this too many times, DAX is always going to be dependent on your model. And yeah, we can say AI can solve for this. It's a lot easier to solve this in Power Query than it is to solve this in every custom model, where you may not have everything set up just so. Whereas Power Query, I need to add a column. I need to transform this table. Generally speaking, yeah, like columns matter, but not nearly as much as what you're trying to do in the model based on the model. Mike, and you both, all three of us have said this. Your DAX is only going to be as simple as your model is.
Yeah, and I got to thank Alex. Appreciate the sponsorship there. Thank you very much for throwing in there. We're trying to make a great discussion here, so thank you very much. We want to appreciate that and acknowledge it as well. So I agree with your point here, Tommy, and I think, well, again, I want to bring up a feature that I've seen inside the Microsoft blog as well. One of them is creating Power BI reports with Jupyter notebooks. Now, granted, there is no data modeling really happening here, right? This is purely there's a data frame that is appearing, basically a single wide table that you may be building in your notebook. And then you can then basically bolt on a Power BI report, and you can then pick columns of the data frame, and it will then auto-generate visuals for you. Okay, so Microsoft already has the technology to do this. They already have the technology to say, based on what you send us some information, and we'll try to pick out interesting data points around you. And to your point, Tommy, right? Automatic insights, super cool. It was a neat feature, but did it really, in reality, provide the value-added data story that we're trying to produce with reports? I would argue the answer is probably no, right? It was limited in what it could do. However, I do think the fact that you're able to do a large majority or get a lot of information out quickly, I think there are some layers, and it's going to get better, right? So I'm just saying this is a progression of things, right? That we're going to continue to keep exploring these generative visuals or generative report elements so that it kind of makes sense. So I guess at the end of the day, when I kind of bring things back, modeling and being able to build your measures and that story of the data, that's a much more user generated or a user-based decision feature, right? So it's going to be much more difficult for people to just show up and be like, oh yeah, Power BI, automatically create me a report, and it just builds this incredible report out of the gate. I think that's just going to be it won't be able to get there technologically for a number of more years. I think it's going to take more time to get there. However, I do think we're already seeing the benefit of a lot of these low code or no code solutions around generating the visuals, interacting between the visuals, right? There's a lot more buttons that are doing more of the report authoring, because I think the report side is easier to generate. Where I'd like to see more integration is, let's start lifting off these heavy loads around measure creation, incremental refresh. Like those are things that should be more based around AI or generative or low coding type solutions. These are very known. Let's call them. These are very known workflows. Right. So if you think about what you're doing in a data model, you're doing a lot of workflow based things, right? You're building relationships, you're making measures, and there's a workflow that's associated with that sequence of designed, items, right? So another one that I think would be very useful here is, and this is why we built our DAX generator. So DAX, the patterns inside DAX are very repeatable. The tool today doesn't give you a lot of help around, hey, are you trying to build a cumulative total, or are you trying to build a star rating based on a number column, right? There should be more libraries or information that is, here's a bunch of DAX that you can go pick from. There's patterns that are existing, and this is why Marco Russo and Alberto built the entire DAX patterns library, because there's the over and over again they kept seeing the same type of calculations occurring all the time. What we really need is we need a better tool that lets you take from a library of DAX patterns, drag them into your data model, and rearrange those patterns so that they work on top of the way your columns are named. That, I think, is much more impactful and powerful. So Microsoft did a good job when they introduced quick measures, but I think they should have open sourced that and allow a lot of other people's to be able to build their own DAX patterns and inject them. Because that is true low code solutioning, right?
Yeah.
Here's 300 measures you can go use inside your data model. Pick one of these, and then those can be injected directly into your data model. Now it's a UI, it's a user interface. So kind of, oh man, I'm going full circle here. Alex, I know you made a comment here back inside the chat window. Basically, we need more wizards. Yeah, we do. We need more wizards, and that's what low code is. It's basically a wizard that sits on top of some information, generates automatic code, and then spits out the answer. So why not open source all of measures? I mean, quick insights or quick measures should be immediately open sourced. Give us the standard on how to build those things, and that way we can then inject them in all the time, and then it'll make immense amount of value. And again, this is the twofold purpose here, right? It provides you code with minimal code experience. You get something in your data model you can go look at and take apart, decompress it, change it, look at it, modify it. And by doing those two things, you're now teaching the audience all about DAX because you're now having good examples appear inside your data model. Anyways.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Like the more you build low code solutions like that, right?
Mhm.
That all of a sudden you bring into the ownership area of that a lot more capabilities, right? So rather than it being the 10% of people who know DAX really well, all of a sudden, you're reducing that down to like a much smaller number because you have something that's repeatable and used. If I'm looking at our conversation though, in terms of like Power Query and visuals, and Chris is pointing out like you can in the Power BI service, you can do a quick report where it's a pretty easy to generate visuals.
Yeah.
The gap here is the model. It's transitioning from Power Query, where I have data that I'm bringing in, and the model itself. And that's where I think if a better low code solution for folks could be implemented just to ensure that the experience in the visual layer is exactly what they would expect it to be. And that requires this layer of, hey, do you have one table? Have fun. You're done. Right? Do you have two? Okay, here's some concepts that you need to understand and you need to set up, and you might need to clean your data before we get to the point of visualization. And imagine how much better that visualization experience would be if you forced the user to go do those data cleaning things beforehand, right? Even if it was a process of, okay, do you want to use the not auto builder, right? And I think that's where we get into these situations where folks are like, oh, I'm going to solve all of these problems for you. No, there are fundamentals that we know about model building that you could absolutely just put into here's an error, right? I want to run this process that validates that I'm saying these objects should be this thing based on what you're telling me. And does my data match that? Yes or no? If it doesn't, give me an example. What doesn't align with that? Because I would assume that it does. And then you're teaching people the data cleansing activities that they need to understand before they get to the model. And I think that's just where the gap is right now in terms of the tool set, because connecting those lines, or just because it allows, like the hack here was allowing any type of relationship to go in between two objects, and then expecting that people are going to be able to develop what they need to in the visual layer.
So Seth, that's a great point, because theoretically I could go and build an entire Power BI report without ever touching my keyboard, except when I click on save. I could literally go through, and it would be very simple, and it may not have the principles, but I think people have the misconception that that is the low code solution, where it's like, no, you can go through without typing anything. However, that doesn't mean that you do not have to learn the fundamentals, the principles, the theory around this. And that's the misconception here.
Yeah. And I think it's a progression, right? I think it's a matter of add value quickly, get people hooked, right? And that's what that was what Excel was. That was what VBA was for me inside Excel. That was Power Query for me when I started using Power Query, right? Get the 80% of the use cases kind of dialed in, figured out, just make it work, right? And then once you've got people's attention, now give them an easy way to get into that. So moving away from the no code, move them into low code. And then you turn people into Alex Powers, where everyone just writes nothing but code. Like, so but it's a progression. You work your way through there.
But there's the fundamentals again. Like I may try this today. I'm going to disconnect my keyboard and build a report, and I probably could. But again, I'm missing a lot of it's going like the tip of the iceberg.
Correct.
Here.
Yes.
And people go, oh, well, I can do Power BI without any code. It's like
you're going to get a very vanilla looking report.
Exactly. But you can still do it. But
yeah.
Doesn't mean you're,
Yeah.
But other solutions back in, like, when we talk about normal coding items, you have to type a lot. You have to understand the language. Anyways, as we go through this, I think my big takeaway is there's fun, regardless of if it's a low code or no code solution, that does not eliminate the need for fundamentals and the theory behind it.
Agreed.
Whether it's going to be notebooks where I can just ask AI what to write in, I still have to understand what I'm trying to get out of it and also how it works. So
yeah, I agree with Chris Kratos. There's a lot of this conversation that is teeing up to good questions tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. So
can I not use my keyboard anymore?
Exactly right. Will I be able to model without using my computer? Yeah. Awesome. So let's jump into what does ChatGPT say. So this is our final segment here. We'll jump into a question that we ask against ChatGPT and kind of gets the answer out, and we see what value is provided from that answer. So my question was, why would my organization want to invest in low code or no code solutions? So ChatGPT comes back and says low code or no code solutions have been increasingly popular in recent years. I would agree with this. I think Microsoft has recognized this direction as well. Couple advantages are increased speed and agility. With low code or no code, you can perform and deploy applications faster than traditional coding methods. I'd agree with that. You have reduced costs. With low code and no code solutions, typically there is less coding requirement in the development phase. This can result in cost savings for your organization. And I would agree. I've built software. And so building software, the most expensive portion of the software technically isn't running it. It's not the servers that it sits on. It's the people that are required to build the logic or the code itself. That is the most expensive part about building applications. And that's what these solutions are doing, is they're addressing the most expensive piece. Totally agree with that statement as well. Improved collaboration, low code or no code solutions, and typically have a user-friendly interface that allows non-technical staff to participate in the development process. I don't think I would have picked up on that one initially, but that's a good point. Increased innovation with low code or no code solution platforms. Your organization can experiment with new ideas and prototypes quickly and easily. Yep. And I think that's an underrated statement right there, because the amount of experiments you're doing with Power BI and data have to be, I mean, you're going to need a lot of people looking at a lot of things to get to value added
even
solutions.
Like all the connections, right?
Yeah,
Pulling
exactly.
Multiple different data sources, mashing it together, seeing if it's going to work out. Yep.
And that's a talking point that we've made on the podcast is the business should be leading the IT group, because the business should be out front experimenting, trying, stitching together random things, because the business is going to find what adds value. Once you figure it out, then that low code, no code solution can be handed over to an IT shop or a BI team, and they can productionalize it or make it, repeatable or open it up for more data. That pattern of working fast and failing fast makes sense to get to an answer that makes, that actually adds value later on. Mm-hmm. And then the last statement they hear, it's easier maintenance and updates. Low code or no code solutions provide built-in testing and debugging tools that make it easier to maintain and update applications over time.
I don't
know about that. Maybe.
Yeah.
I like the effort.
Well, maybe that's because Microsoft hasn't built that into their tool currently. So maybe that's the next horizon for Microsoft. Should be thinking about, okay, what does data ops look like for Power BI? Because that's a huge missing nugget as of this point. Like we're just starting to get to the point where we can do like diffs between dev, test, prod with code, so we can see what's actually changing. Okay, good, success. But we're not able to get down to the did my data table change in these different environments? And so that's the next layer of what we're going to get to is this data ops layer.
And I'll take that back because actually in Power Apps, they've done phenomenal features and tools to monitor debugging, like what's going on. And I use it extensively with users. Say, okay, connect to this. Let's see why this error is occurring.
Oh, interesting.
So it's I mean, it is full scale.
But again,
we're Power Apps.
It's a Power Apps thing. So that's another.
So it does work. That's a good point by ChatGPT. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. So the point is valid. It just doesn't necessarily apply to Power BI yet.
Right.
So.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would also argue too. Microsoft is probably focused on getting more monthly active users, and MAUs, I think is what they call them. Mm-hmm. Microsoft is very focused on getting more people engaged with the tool, and less focused on should I make sure that you have a good data ops process. Like that seems like getting that running is valuable to large enterprise, but not necessarily valuable to the average everyday user. They're not thinking that way yet. So maybe there's a product gap there.
How would you rate ChatGPT? 6 out of 7, Tommy.
6 out of 7.
I give it an 8.7 out of 10.
I'd give it a 775 out of 1,000.
Nice.
Yeah. Nice. No, maybe a little higher. Maybe 850. At 850, I'll go 850. Okay. 850 out of 1,000.
Clearly, we need to work on our data culture and governance here because we all get used to
I don't know what you're talking about. My way's the right way.
No, my way's the right way. Someone in the chat will have to normalize the data so we can actually.
Somebody's not tracking correctly.
Who's going to govern us?
Who's going to govern this?
Who's our sponsor?
You can't govern me.
I sponsor myself. So, there.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone very much. We appreciate the conversation. The chat thread has been absolutely lively. So thank you very much, chat, for jumping in and really engaging with the topic. A lot of great ideas are occurring here. Thank you very much for the conversation and how much fun this was today. Our only ask for you, if you listen to the podcast, is if you like this, if you found some value from it, if you had a couple chuckles or laughs around it, we only ask that you share it with somebody else. Let somebody else know that you found some value from this, and encourage them to discuss and engage with the topic as well. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
And guys, we have a mailbag. Submit your questions. We do look at the mailbag submission. So make sure to submit a question or a topic you want us to talk about. Also, join us, follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, anywhere a podcast is found. If you want to join us live, you can do so every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, on the PowerBI.tips social media channels.
One time you almost messed it up. You've already
off course on that.
You've only done this 212 times, and you almost messed up.
I was going off the cliff and I just turned back. So,
well, thank you very much for listening. We'll catch you next time.